I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. What I can do, I should do. And what I should do, by the grace of God, I will do. That's a quote by Edward Everett Hale. And for people that say, oh, I'm just one person, what can I do? That's your answer. You can do something. Everybody can. And someone who's doing something today is Frances Howard, who's a headmistress. And our film today is about the education system. Now, we're here at the Priory Church. We're in Dorset. We're at a priory particularly because it was a monastery. And it reminds us that the first schools were held by the monks. Their pupils were largely taught through a Catholic faith, which would incredibly have given it some sort of religious leaning. We moved from there into the private schools, set up by private people, private pupils paying a lot of money. That's where the rich went. But nonetheless, the education system flourished. And then the system morphed again when the state schools were brought in so that young and poor children could have an education. And from there it flourished. It flourished in this country of ours, and it became the jewel in the crown of education over the world, arguably the best in the world. People coming from every single country in the world to come and be taught here, in our universities, our colleges. But oh dear, what's happened to it now? Politics has interfered. We've got political agendas taking place in our schools. We are being dumbed down in our schools. There are children leaving schools now that can't even read, write, add up. And we have to ask ourselves, just what's going on here? What's happened? Why is our state system in such a state? Well, we've got with us today Frances Howard, who's a headmistress, and she's going to tell us, well, she's going to reveal to us things that you'd never dream of. It's some of it's shocking, some of it's appalling. Stand by to be educated into our current state school system by Frances. And she's one person standing up here doing what she can for the good of all. Thank you, Frances.
Hello. If you're concerned about the rhetoric about the EU, I would like to bring an idea into the argument. Now, the idea is from a book which I have read recently, a marvellous book called The Road to Serfdom by Friedrich Hayek. He said, after his personal experiences with the Nazis and the communists, the two goals of personal freedom and a planned single economy were irreconcilable. He said that if you had a business and you ran a business of your own, it went counter to the planned single economy. So personal achievements and personal freedoms were not possible with a single idea of economics. Now, he also said that there was a very great moral problem once you'd set up a single economic plan. Who decides who spends the taxes and where? Do you spend the taxes repairing the drains in Latvia or the flood defences in Britain? Who decides? And another area which we are very concerned about, the human rights. When Liako Chindamo was released, he was given the freedom to stay in this country. Most people thought he should be flogged and sent back to Italy. He had murdered a man who'd run a school, Philip Lawrence, and he was now a danger to Mrs. Lawrence, who had no choice in the matter, having had her life ruined by this man. Who decides that this man should stay in this country? And the next area, which I happen to know something about, is the education. In Europe, there is an education agenda run by the Commission. Parents have not had a decision as to what is taught in our schools. And the Commission have allowed a series of industrialists, Marks and Spencers, Tesco's, computer firms, to get together and decide what children should learn in our schools. I think that that is a moral decision they are not permitted to take. However, I would like to explore this idea a bit further. The agenda was started a long time ago in the 70s by a communist called Edith Cresson. And she said that knowledge was a perishable product and that most children really just needed skills training. And her idea was to get a lot of computers into classrooms and make sure that they were well up in using the computer. Knowledge was not part of their educational training. I'm not sure how many parents realise that and whether they would wish that for their own children. However, it was all decided, and she allowed the agenda to be put forward into Lisbon 2000, that schools should have basic training and not knowledge. Now, many people in the Lisbon agenda did not agree with this, but they had to sign the whole package. They couldn't take out the education legislation. And so Mr. Blair signed this away for our schools and our children in this country. Now, I work in schools, and I've been very surprised at how many lessons I've had to take, which have been just computer lessons. Children have found it very difficult to find things on the computer since they can't spell and they can't read very well. Edith Cresson said she knew governments would not give up the local control of education, and so she thought up a way of getting to children through the internet, and she created the European Educational Net, and it's now become the biggest provider for schools in Europe. She also tried to reach into higher education and bypassed the local controls, and so she created a modern European studies degree. Now, I looked up the core reading list for the modern European studies degree, and I looked for Hayek, the book The Road to Serfdom, and I thought it would be very interesting because he'd been a chief advisor, economic advisor to Mrs. Thatcher, and she had particularly made small businesses free to run and operate and to be successful. And this had been a very, very great success economically in her time in England. And I looked for this book in the core reading lists of the European Studies degree. It was not there. But 3 guesses. Who was there? Good old Karl Marx, that clapped out economist of the past 80 years. He was to be the example for the new modern Europeans of the future. Edith Cresson, who was in the papers for corruption, was allowed back into her job after being fired on a Friday. She was back after the weekend on a Monday morning, which said to me that she was allowed to believe in the European Union, but corruption didn't matter very much. Her idea for controlling education was to further the aims and ambitions of political Europe. Her interest in education was not her primary aim, and I would like to say that it is her road for the children of this country. The road to serfdom is through this way of dealing with education. Children in our schools desperately need individual interests, individual attention from qualified teachers. If you take this away and centralise education, give it to people who have other things on their mind, then the individual needs of children in our own country are not going to be attended to. Local control of schools is vital for children who parents know what they need. Local authorities are much more in tune with the needs of their own community. It is not right to have big decisions about what goes into the curriculum taken behind closed doors with bureaucrats, industrialists, people who have personal agendas.